Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our first research workshop with Luyao, Ivanma, and Nir Shimaya. I'll shortly present BAF, and then I'll let Nir introduce everyone. So BAF is a 501c3 nonprofit. We accelerate blockchain education and awareness. We do that by launching university-accredited courses with the help of University Blockchain Club. And we host online meetup like this one to help with education, among other things. So feel free to become a free BAF member if you want to keep up with our opportunities and hear more about meetup like this. So thank you so much for joining, and Nir, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so thanks so much, Alexis. So I just want to thank BAF. Actually, what we are trying to do is to create a community for researchers that want to do research on blockchain and DeFi. And the main idea of these workshops is every 2 weeks, other researcher can come and present their work in this fascinating environment. And today it's a big honor to have Luyao and Ivan. I spoke with them because I think that, sorry about the noise. I think that this paper is a really good one for introduce blockchain and decentralization. That is one of the main ideas of blockchain. And that's it. So go ahead and good luck. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm very honored together with Ivan to present our joint work on the SOK blockchain decentralization. So we have another co-author who cannot join today, but we will introduce all of us. So today, the agenda is as follows. First, I will be presenting at a glance and also the taxonomy of the decentralization. And then Ivan will be presenting one new decentralization index proposed by us, also the empirical research using that new decentralization index. Finally, I will conclude with some future research and practices. First, this is our author team, and it's super diverse. First, three of us are also from a nonprofit organization called Sun Econ, registered in UK. The other corresponding author and I were the co-founding president. So his primary institute is in the industry, and I'm in academia. And Ivan is a very excellent young scholar who is only an undergraduate student, but who is a joint first author on this project. So our landscape have yeah, got it. Okay, so and also our institution, for my academic institution, it's jointly funded by Chinese University, Wuhan University, and Duke University, US University, something like a joint venture built to innovate, to combine Eastern and Western philosophers, so students can kind of like building global leadership with rooted globalism. So it's in China. And Ivan is at the US Duke campus. Duke is in Durham, has very beautiful hiking places all of you should visit. And Yulin is in Switzerland, Zurich, so very beautiful. Also, our background are very diverse. So I'm an assistant professor of economics. That's my tenure track, but I'm also a senior research scientist in Data Science Research Center. So Ivan's major has statistics, economics, and maths. Yulin has PhD in economics, but also he first studies quantum physics. So that's the diverse background of us putting this work together. And so what is the background that motivated our research? We would never wanted to write an SOK on blockchain decentralization if there exists one. So at the very beginning, actually, we're not that quite ambitious. We just want to kind of like propose a new blockchain index for blockchain usage. because we think as a blockchain, we heard a lot like the decentralization levels of voting mechanisms in the consensus algorithms, but we feel like we did not hear anything about the transaction level. But starting from the very first Bitcoin, it's like cryptocurrency, the purpose was first to use peer-to-peer transaction. So at the very beginning, we only want to propose like one single decentralization index. But when we start to write a paper, we found, okay, we need to first define decentralization, right? So we always hear this sentence, blockchain is so great because it provides us with a decentralized economy. And suddenly we get stuck there. We kind of like, what is decentralization? We can't really find a clear definition, like on what aspect we are talking about. And we start to like checking the papers. We find existing papers are really mentioning decentralization when they are like meaning completely different things. So we think, okay, it might be better we first have the taxonomy of what different people means by decentralization of blockchain before we start to put our contributions. So that was motivation. Another thing we really bothers us is we know that ending outcome should always be like not necessarily the same with our motivation, right? So for example, when we don't know each other, we want to make friends. Of course, our initial motivation is we finally have a very great friendship, but the outcome might not be the case. So it's the same. We want to build blockchain as a peer-to-peer transaction system. We want it to be decentralized, but how to measure its real decentralization level? It can't just be something very vague conceptual concept. It must having something that we can measure quantitatively. So that motivates our research question. Our first research question is, can we really build a taxonomy of blockchain decentralization? That is, when people are talking about blockchain decentralization, what are the different aspects they might be looking at? The second one is, based on that, if no one has proposed a decentralized index transaction, then we want to propose one. Finally, we also want to know, do our decentralization index, when we use it to apply it to DeFi tokens, can we get any meaningful results with economic factors? So here is our main result. First, we are indeed able to make this taxonomy. So we're looking at the literature, we find in general there are those 5 dimensions, blockchain consensus, network, wealth, governance, and transaction. And we can further group it into the 3 layers, infrastructure, incentives, and application. We will talking about more what are those definitions very soon. And secondly, we indeed found no one has ever defined a decentralized index for blockchain transaction or usage. So we proposed one based on Shalom entropy, and we found it can intuitively characterize our human understanding of what decentralization is. And finally, we do some empirical research. We like analyze top DeFi tokens using the data from DeFi pools and other data sources. We want to see what are the inter and intratemporal decentralization dynamics. Then we also we want to find some explainable analysis. So we're finding like 2 stable coin. It's actually 1 stable coin, but first like at some point it changes the names and changes the collateral. So from collateral with only Ether to multi-collateral. So it provides us a very great event to see how in those cases the index will change. And finally, we also conducted some economic analysis to see if we see some inklings of the connections so we can inspire future research. So those are the main results of the paper. Here is our contribution map. So our contribution is the red part. So what are the literature in general you can see for blockchain research on decentralization? In general, it could be from 2 perspectives. from the left-hand side, in general, you heard those research from computer scientists and cryptographers. So they were looking at blockchain ecosystem in a protocol-based thinking. So they will be looking at things like consensus, network, and governance decentralization. So it's more from the blockchain design itself. And on the right-hand side, it comes more from economists and people in finance. So we are not looking at the blockchain design, but we're looking at how it affects people's real behavior and the market prices of the DeFi. So we in general looking at something like wealth decentralization, like how people get allocated assets on the DeFi market. Also the transaction decentralization, like how the volumes of transaction distribute among different people. So it's more an user-based approach. So what are we doing here? So basically our research is we want to combining all of those existing research, and we want to understand so what are the different aspects from the different people to provide first as a taxonomy of blockchain decentralization. And then we propose our new decentralization index, because we see a hole here, like no one has ever proposed one for the blockchain transaction. And finally, we kind of like go to the economics and finance people side and see what's the possible interaction of the blockchain index and economic factors. So we're kind of like bridging those two literatures into a more systemization of knowledge. So how are we going to do? The first is like in our paper, we kind of like researches all the literature that has the word decentralization in their paper. If we are missing any paper, we would be very grateful, like you recommend the paper to us. So we will adding it to the map as well. So how did we look at those papers? We first look at what types of decentralization are they looking at, what are the matrix and what are the dimensions. So in general, the dimensions are something like the consensus, wealth, network, and governance, etc. And then we are looking at what as like index they are using to characterize the decentralization. And we found in general they are using something like Shannon entropy and Gini index. Those kinds of like things and like Akamoto coefficient. So those kind of things are in general used in the economic analysis of a country's inequality levels. And we're also looking at whether they have a real quantitative index. So some of those papers, they have one, so they in general produces daily, weekly, monthly index. But some papers, they just mention it at a conceptual level. They provide a formula, they never calculate it out using real world data. And some other papers are not empirical or quantitative. They are using game theory models to model the dynamics using like very abstract mathematics. However, they did not produce any explicit solutions or data analysis. And we found in general, they mainly focusing on two assets, Ethereum and Bitcoin, and a few other DeFi assets. So that's why for the second part, when we are proposing our new transaction decentralization index, so we also kind of like doing the thing few people do. So we are doing the thing on the top 10 or top 20 more DeFi assets, because existing literature in general focusing more on Ethereum and Bitcoin, but not the DeFi tokens. Okay, so now let's go to the 5 dimensions of blockchain. The first dimension is consensus. So what is consensus? It is, we see blockchain is tamper-proof. Consensus is at the core because it can replace the trustworthy third party. So it is the decentralization in the participation of consensus process to record or validate a transaction. And then it's a network network layer is kind of like how the different nodes on the blockchain communicate with each other. For the wealth layer, it's how the assets and tokens allocate the rewards allocates between different rows of the people, like miners or users or other stakeholders. So blockchain governance, first I need to admit the limitation here. We're only talking about on-chain governance because off-chain governance is too complicated to discuss. So here is the decentralization of ownership of the whole system and making decisions. You can thinking of this like in the US, you are voting for a new law. And finally, it's the transaction level. So it's the usage of the tokens, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and DeFi tokens. You use it for transactions. So in terms of this, we've found we can further characterize it into 3 layers based on the functionality. Network and consensus belong more to the infrastructure layer of the blockchain. So it's something in general, when you first design a blockchain, like the CS or cryptographers, they have to build both the consensus and network layer as a base chain. So it includes consensus mechanism, network communication, and data consolidations. And the second layer has more economics, but it's like a general economics. It's you need to design the incentives so people will respond to the incentives to make the blockchain safe. That includes economic rewards, like for Ethereum 2.0, you have the slashes, which is punishment, and you also have staking reward, which is the reward for good behavior to make the system secure. And also we need to have some incentive mechanisms like transaction fee mechanisms, EIP 1559. We are also talking about assets distribution between the miners and the users. We are talking a lot about the MEV problems because we think miners have kind of like advantages to get more miner extracted values that user cannot. And finally, we go to the application layer. So in general, for on-chain governance, it will also be something like a smart contract that programs voting mechanisms. Like if you want to like decide how we are going to update Ethereum, so an Ethereum improvement proposal or something further, there in general, like for on-chain governance in the future, it's going to be a voting process. You propose and vote and enact. And you use the DeFi applications to do the transactions. It's in general involving with something like a smart contract on Ethereum blockchain. And on another like 3rd generation blockchain called Internet Computer, it's something called Canister, another like name for the smart contract. Okay, so now Ivan will be presenting the new index that we propose on the application layer and especially for usage.
Right, yeah, thank you, Dr. Zhang. I'll go over our new decentralization index that we propose specifically for blockchain transactions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Right, so yeah, our decentralization index was adapted from Shannon entropy. And as Dr. Zhang said earlier, in our literature review, we found that Shannon entropy was commonly used to characterize the randomness or disorder of a certain distribution or system. And it has been used already in literature to specifically look at, for example, consensus decentralization. So we did a small adaptation to make this index more intuitive. So an exponential transformation that would make the index values range from 1 to n, where big N is the total number of transactions. And so the higher the value of the index, the more decentralized a certain blockchain transaction system is. And it is the index mass value is maximal at uniform distribution, where each transaction takes on the same value, and that would yield a decentralization index value of n. And if you're interested in this equation over here, P of VI is simply the weight of each transaction with respect to the total number of transactions. And can we have the next slide, please? And yeah, to sort of simulate and model and to explain our index better, we did 2 simulations. First one is changing the total number of transactions. And the next one is changing the value or the weight of each transaction in a system. So decentralization, let's say, in the sense where a system is completely decentralized, ideally, it is everyone transacting with everyone. It's a peer-to-peer system with small transactions between each parties, rather than, for example, large whale holders having large transactions but smaller number of transactions. So we used a model from an instance of the quantum response equilibrium here to model the value of transactions, where each transaction has the value of e to the lambda n, where lambda is just a weight factor, like how much weight this transaction is taking on. And we can see from the simulations on the right-hand side, when we hold the weight of transactions constant, when we increase the number of total transactions, we see that the level of decentralization, or the value of our decentralization index, goes up. And that intuitively does help us characterize when there are larger number of transactions, the system is more decentralized. And then on the bottom simulation, we looked at what happens to the value of our decentralization index holding the number of transactions constant, but just by varying the weight of each transaction. And as we can see, when we increase the weight of each individual transaction, that sort of creates a more centralized system, and that decreases our decentralization value. So in theory, if we have a uniform distribution, that would yield the largest value, where lambda is simply 0, that gives us a uniform distribution, and that gives us the maximum value of decentralization, as shown in the bottom simulation. And when lambda goes to infinity, theoretically, that would only there will be one transaction with infinite weight, and then our decentralization index value should go to 1, which is the smallest possible value. Next slide, please. And so with this new decentralization index constructed, we sort of wanted to look at the empirical implications of decentralization. So we built this, this is how we processed our data to create our decentralization index, and also to conduct empirical analysis, which I'll present in the next session, in the next section. So we derived the Ethereum transaction data, specifically of DeFi token transfers, from the Google BigQuery public dataset. It updates daily all of the Ethereum blockchain's information loaded into Google BigQuery, and we queried it from there to calculate the decentralization index for daily transactions. Created the Shannon entropy, and then created our index along with moving averages to help us analyze the system. And then we added on market data from Coinmetrics, which is a third-party provider of market information. We got information such as transaction volume, price, volatility, etc., from that source. And then finally, using all of that data, we conducted some empirical and also econometric analysis with that. So next slide, please. To start off our empirical portion of our presentation, I guess we should first look at the overall distribution of decentralization. So how does the decentralization value differ between protocols? So here, I'll also explain in the next slide what specific protocols we tried to look at. But we looked at protocols based on 5 categories that are commonly used: lending, decentralized index exchanges or DEXs, assets, payments, and also derivatives. So these 5 categories. And we can see that DEX and lending applications at the bottom here tend to be more decentralized. And this sort of does intuitively work. And as I'll show in our next slide, these applications are typically more popular with more users and more total value locked in this application. So they're more popular and more used protocols, and that should intuitively also mean more decentralized and smaller number of transactions, more distributed. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so we took the top 5 applications by total value locked, and we got this. And just to explain, total value locked is just basically the amount of assets stored in this decentralized finance protocol. We got the top 5 for lending, DEX, assets, and got the top 4 for payments and derivatives. And as we can see from this chart over here, in general, lending and DEX applications have higher total value locked by ranking, which means that there's more assets stored, and they're probably used more by users compared to assets and payments and derivatives, which in fact are growing quickly as of now. But are still smaller applications in general. And we see the trend that these larger applications tend to be more decentralized in terms of transactions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yep. And then we wanted to also look at intertemporal decentralization, so how decentralization has changed across time. And here specifically, we looked at the DEX applications, and we can see there's a very significant event here around the August 2020, or September 2020, where when Uniswap and SushiSwap airdrop their tokens to all of their users, all of their early users at first. So we can see a very high level of initial decentralization where there's a large number of transactions to different users kind of evenly spread across. And that's why we see a very high level of decentralization on our index. This sort of intuitively also empirically verifies our simulations in our index. And another thing that we observe is that there are similar peaks and troughs across different protocols in the level of decentralization. It sort of lines up. And this sort of sparked our curiosity in what actually affects the decentralization index. And it seems that if it's so similar across different protocols, it intuitively indicates that it's probably market factors or large economic factors that influence the level of decentralization rather than events of individual protocols such as governance changes and such. And that sort of also provoked our next portion of our empirical research. And the final trend that we noticed here is that there's a sort of a convergence in the level of decentralization to the end here. And it just seems that regardless of the initial distribution, for example, of Uni and Sushi being airdropped to so many tokens, the level of decentralization in the end does come down to a similar level of how tokens are utilized. Not everyone's using them all at the same time. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here is another intertemporal graph for lending applications. And it's sort of we observe quite similar trends with DEX in that there is a sort of convergence in intertemporal decentralization and that there are similar peaks and troughs, once again, reflecting market, we believe that reflect market events, and that we can see that these top lending applications like Aave and DAI, which is a stable coin, they have the highest level of decentralization because they are transacted and being used more. And we can also see an interesting change here from the orange protocol to the purple protocol. So Sai is the single collateral version of a stable coin made by the Maker Foundation. Now it's the Maker DAO, where it only accepts Ethereum as collateral, and DAI is the second version of the stable coin where it accepts multiple kinds of collateral. And Sai, as we can see from our decentralization index, in fact, has been rendered obsolete. It's now being replaced by DAI, and that's why we see the shift from orange to the purple here. And with, can we also go to the next slide, please? So with this sort of interesting event happening between DAI and Sai, we wanted to use this sort of opportunity to further explore what actually affects decentralization. So here's a quick timeline of the different governance events of the Maker DAO now. So as of July 20th, 2021, they moved to full decentralization where they liquidated all of their assets and gave it back to the community. Now they call themselves fully decentralized. And along the way, we can see Sai was launched in December 2017. DAI was launched in September 2019. Along the way, there are different governance events. We go to the next slide, please. And so we sort of chose a few and plotted here on this graph of Sai's and DAI's decentralization index respectively. We can see that events such as the Bitcoin crash here in March 2020 has caused a spike in decentralization, probably indicating that a lot of users were trying to transact, trying to sell, or trying to get out of their situation, while other events such as governance events where Maker, for example, would return all of their funds to DAO in July 2021 or such, did not have such large effects on the decentralization index. So we sort of hypothesized that the value of decentralization is really driven by market events rather than governance events. And so that sort of motivated our final piece of our empirical analysis, which is the econometric analysis, which I'll show in the next slide. we specifically wanted to just see if returns and volatility is being affected by decentralization, because they're very strong indicators of market movement. And just with the regression here, we found that different granularities from 7-day to 30 days of Ethereum returns, and also the first principle component of all these returns are significant for Psi, but only 30-day Ethereum returns are significant for DAI. Our explanation for this lies on that Psi only takes Ether as collateral, so it is more affected by Ethereum returns, versus DAI, it takes multiple collaterals, so it is less affected by Ether returns alone. And this definitely shows that there is a relationship between decentralization and market movement, as indicated by returns here in this case. We also noticed that volatility is also really significant for Psi, probably also indicating that when there's high market volatility, we see that there is a greater decentralization or transaction happening, just so as users are trying to respond to changes in market situations. And overall, I believe this really confirms our hypothesis that decentralization, transaction decentralization, as characterized through our index, really describes user behavior and how users are really driven by market forces rather than, for example, governance events. Can we go to the next slide, please? And yeah, so this is the empirical portion of our analysis. And I'll pass it on to Professor Zhang to go over future research and practice.
Thanks, Ivan, for the empirical analysis part. So let me summarize our contribution and also what are the open questions future scholars. So in terms of the contribution and the open questions, we in general have three perspectives. The first perspective is we really provide a taxonomy of blockchain decentralization from different perspectives, and that was not done by previous literature. However, what are the open questions we haven't done yet? Number one is how the different dimensions of decentralization impact each other. We haven't done that yet. For example, how the decentralization at the consensus layer would in the end influence the decentralization at the transactional level. That would be super interesting to discover. The second one is what are the mechanisms and incentives that motivates usage decentralization? So in our paper, we already find some evidences there is the influence. For example, when you have the airdrop event, right? So we see the usage decentralization suddenly increases. And also when we have the kind of like diminish of one coin and the rise of another coin, it also changes dramatically. And finally, it's the collateral. So when the collateral ether becomes super volatile or the return increases, you also see the changes in the decentralization of the stable coin. So it seems there is some influence, but what is the mechanism and what is the general principle behind it, we haven't studied yet. The second contribution is we proposed a new decentralization index, and we provided all the data and code. And in the future, you can use the same data science pipeline to calculate the decentralized index for any DeFi assets you want. And it's based on Shalom entropy. However, although we already provide some preliminary analysis, we haven't have a very comprehensive analysis on how the decentralized index interact with economic factors. Economic factors has so many features, has volatility, has price, has a lot of things. But we haven't studied it comprehensively. We can't draw one conclusion like how like based on different kinds of DeFi token, what should be the influence. We also haven't studied any causal inference. So in our paper, we only used some regression analysis. We use past data to predict future data. It's only about prediction, but we haven't done causal inferences yet. And finally, we find something very interesting. It also very thanks Isha's question. So it's related to Isha's question. So what are the biggest misperception here? So we found like everyone would expect a blockchain to provide a peer-to-peer transaction system. Blockchain is decentralized, but we found if we're looking at the user like levels of decentralization, it varies a lot. But we haven't studied how the market forces and economic incentives drive levels of the final realized decentralization. So that's something would be very super interesting, because all the blockchain protocol, when it's designed by computer scientists and cryptography, they were they intended to make it decentralized. So what's more likely to influence the final outcome should be more from the market force and economic incentive side that's not studied yet. Another thing is how the original design of blockchain decentralization influences the long-term equilibrium of the level of decentralization. It's also not studied. So again, so when the blockchain was designed, it is something like, okay, we make it available for people to, in the end, do a decentralized transaction. Like so many people enter this system, and also they transact in a way that's more equal, not one person occupies the market. But they never study like how the different designs would end up with different long-term equilibrium results when people would react to incentives. Another thing we want to see is this is another ongoing project we are doing, not only for decentralized index, but in general for the data science pipeline for research and education. We found on the market, there are so many data science pipeline, including the data provider, Python API, and dashboards such as Econometric, Masara, or CoinGecko. But in general, those are more for investors, not for researchers and educators. So the index they provided are more like either from traditional finance or from CS literature and cryptography literature, more technical things. So they don't provide something like decentralized index. And another thing is, in general, the index they provide do not have open access code and data, so we can't evaluate whether it's meaning anything that can be used for research and education. It's very understandable, because when it goes to money, it needs to be a black box, otherwise it's easy for other people to copy. But we think it's so meaningful to create like better blockchain ecosystem. We need to have the data science pipeline for research and education. So here is a pipeline we have right now, but we want to upgrade it. Number one is we do have the data source that's open source. However, it actually relies on a third-party centralized party, which is Google BigQuery. So Google gets the data from Ethereum blockchain and then make it into SQL database system that's more conventional. So data scientists are very much likely to know how to query the data and process the data. And the next step is we programmed like object-oriented programming languages in Python, and we have the notebook all released on GitHub. You all can have access with. So what you need to do is you just change the input to the DeFi token or other DeFi assets you want to research, and you change the beginning date of the ending date you want to calculate the index. You will be able to get the index of the DeFi assets you have. But the problem here is, I think it still requires you to know what is Python, know what to input the variables, and then to run the whole algorithm to get the index. So in the future, I guess we will be like doing something like for the Google BigQuery, we want to put it completely on chain. So we are building our own database on the blockchain, so it's not centralized anymore, and it can be completely open. The second one is when we are doing calculating our blockchain decentralized index, if we want to make it more user friendly, and for those people who even don't know coding can do this, we might create some user interface for you to interact. And finally, we create the dashboard, like the pricing chart you see on Coinmetrics. We produce that for decentralized index, as you have already seen in our presentation. And finally, we deployed it to servers. So right now we deploy it to centralized servers, but in the future, we again want to upgrade it to a decentralized hosting like systems such as IPFS or the internet computer. So for this project, we very much like to call for collaboration with other researchers and like industry partners as well. So right now we are actually having the Ethereum part cooperating with Ethereum Foundation, because I'm like the principal investigator on 2 Ethereum academic grant projects. And we would also have another dataset created on the internet computer. So that one will be collaborating, I guess, with DeFi. So we're in the process of discussing those collaborations. And if any of you are also interested, we would love to discuss in any possible ways. In general, we just want to make something the market don't have. We want to make something that's completely transparent data and code, explainable, and it's for research and education for us to understand why and how to make the blockchain system better. Cool. So that is a paper. We have our working paper also open access on posted on archive. So we have our data and the code posted on the GitHub. So you can use it to replicate all our analysis and figures. You can also produce more decentralized index for any assets of your choice, for the DeFi tokens. Another thing worth mentioning is I'm also leading an Industry 4.0 open education resource initiatives. Till now, I have produced 3 series. The first one is how to innovate on the internet computer. So it's another blockchain, like a little bit different, but also younger than the Ethereum blockchain that's able to host web services and something like metaversities. The second one is intelligent economics, so something more about the intersection of economics, AI, and data science. Finally, it's like computational microeconomics, something at the intersection of economics and computer science with a lot of application cases, blockchain scenarios. So all those are CC licensed. So if you are interested, you can also check the learning materials on those pages. If you are interested in collaborating like open source education, initiatives, I would also love to discuss with you. Cool. So now I guess we will leave the time to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Was amazing. I have also a few questions, but before I just want to go off, I think there was only one question in the chat from Arieli. If you, I will, so there was big problem with Tara, Luna coin, that they are decentralized, and these days there is some problems with Celsius, as we discussed before. So the question is, what is the connection between regulation that we think maybe now more countries will have regulation and decentralization? Like what, from your point of view, from your research, how you can connect between regulation and decentralization?
Yeah, cool. I can make a very simple example so everyone can feel better to personalize. So all of you have your banking account, right? So right now in your country, if you forget the password of your banking account, you can go to the bank. You can use your national ID to like get the password, reset the password again, right? So, however, for your it's kind of like MetaMask wallet, if you forget the password, then you will be locked out of the millions of assets. So decentralization really requires a lot of self-custody. I think decentralization is only the instrument, not the final thing we want to kind of like pursue. So we cannot sacrifice the ends for the instruments. So the thing is, for people who really know, are really able to do a self-custody, blockchain decentralization might be a good thing. Otherwise, it might be a super bad thing. So if you says you are a person who never remember password, please go centralize the bank, not go for blockchain. Another thing is very intriguing is about kind of like the civilization levels of the people in the blockchain system. And there is a lot of research about like when people being anonymous, they are more likely to perform like very bad behaviors. So it's very interesting. So I don't know if you know about this. So in the past, like a well-known professor did some machine learning topic analysis for anonymous forum called Econ Job Market Rumors, and found there were a lot of disgusting topics discussed there just because people are being anonymous. Actually, if you go to a lot of anonymous AMA in the blockchain community, sometimes you will have super bad experience. So I guess regulations in a lot of cases is really needed when people are still lacking of self-custody, do not have enough knowledge about how to use the system, also are not civilized enough to regulate themselves for bad behaviors, especially actually for discrimination on these disadvantaged groups.
So Luyao and Ivan, you're amazing. Thanks for the presentation. We ran out of time, so I will send you some questions later by email or something. I want to thank everyone that for your attendance, and in general, what we want to do every 2 weeks, we will have a workshop like that. Another researcher will come and show like recent work in these topics. It's more going to be an economics discussion. So it's important to take it into account. In the chat, you have a link. You can become a BUFF member. I super recommend it. And that's it. And we will post the next event like 2 weeks from now. It will be about security, another part of the trilemma. And thanks again. Thanks a lot. It was amazing.